Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, December the 17th, 2021. So, today is the first anniversary of my attendance in this hotel. Yes, it's been 365 days since I moved in here. Actually, this isn't the first time I've been in this hotel. I was here for about 6 weeks last summer. But as if to mark this momentous occasion, I was awakened this morning by an earthquake. And 4:13 a.m. it was. I found myself shaken awake, and I couldn't understand why that would happen. And then I found out there'd been an earthquake at exactly that time. 3.5 magnitude. No damage reported. I'm reminded that a little over 50 years ago, there was almost a near hysteria on the West Coast about the big one coming. The big one was coming. There was nothing anyone could do about it. And in fact, there was a best-selling book, I think was called The Last Days of the Late Great State of California. California tumbles into the sea, like from that Steely Dan song. I thought I would start today with talking about viral stories, viral internet stories. And there's two kinds of stories or tweets that go viral. There's the kind of, cute kittens and the like, or an alligator and a puppy becoming friends. People love, you call these love clicks. And then there's hate clicks. And that seems to be what the news media is after now, or if we can call it the journalism, the news media. I'll have a comment on that shortly. Here is a prime example from Screen Rant. Now, Screen Rant hosts Ryan George's pitch meetings videos once a week, which are absolutely delightful and usually hilarious. But the rest of it is clickbait. Terrible, terrible takes. Listicles. 13 things you didn't know about the latest MCU movie. That sort of thing. This is an essay by Donnie Smith Jr. And who is he when he is at home? Donnie has been writing for as long as he could hold a pencil, and has studied film for even longer. Again, he loves films of all sorts and has a more than decent knowledge of them, although horror is where his expertise lies. While able to critique with the best of them, he prefers to look at things in a more positive light. Okay. Despite all that, his listicle is called Six Things About It's a Wonderful Life That Have Aged Poorly. It's a Wonderful Life is shown in the homes of many every year, but some are realizing that not everything about the film holds up today. One of the most iconic Christmas movies of all time, It's a Wonderful Life, has some aspects that many find has aged poorly by today's standards. The movie is still a wondrous film that can be enjoyed year-round, but the film is very much a product of its time. Unlike every other film ever made. Standards have changed drastically since 1946, and this film serves as a time capsule for how much. The movie should still be celebrated and watched every year, but certain things should be pointed out. One, the town keeps the money a secret. George Bailey is shown to be a mostly selfless man toward the town. However, when he is in danger of losing the building alone, in his eyes, the town does nothing to help. The problem is that his rescue was done behind his back. It is one thing to surprise someone, it is another thing to let them break down and think they are hopeless. Perhaps they didn't have enough money to save the building alone until, they announced it. George is kind of mean. That's number two. James Stewart is a fantastic actor with many highly rated movies on IMDb. Is that how you Quantify, how fantastic an actor is by looking up the ratings of movies on IMDb. And George Bailey is one of his best roles. George is played to be a selfless man who only wants to live life. Professional writer, huh? But admittedly, some of his actions are questionable. The most obvious example is when he blows up at his family. It is fully understandable and even relatable why it happened, but George could have gone about it better. I wonder how Donnie here, what is his experience of life? What's the worst thing that's ever happened to him? Has he ever been in a situation which results in George Bailey talking about his probable imminent future, disgrace, bankruptcy, prison? I don't really think that Donnie has been in that position. Another example is when he refuses to give Mary her clothes back. Sure, this could be seen as harmless flirting, but Mary was left hiding in a bush without clothes while George just laughed it all away. At the end of the day, George is a very kind and selfless man down on his luck, but those around him didn't deserve the way he treated them. I recall Donna Reed didn't seem to take that little joke all that badly. George is a victim. Okay. In many ways, George is a victim of others' selfishness. How is this problematic? From a young age, George wanted to leave the sleepy town of Bedford Falls and travel the world. These wishes were well known, yet it seemed as if everyone in George's life wanted to keep him there. They knew George would reluctantly stay there with honestly little care about what he wanted to do. Oh, you mean the people in Bedford Falls were selfish? Golly, that is so unusual. There were plenty of people who could have taken over the building and loan when George's father passed, yet the responsibilities landed on his shoulders. Because it was a family business? Even when George gave up his honeymoon money to the town, some of them acted selfishly and demanded more for him. People, they're just the worst. George may have lashed out and acted selfishly himself, but only after he was pushed to the breaking point. Mr. Potter isn't evil. It's at this point that one must ask whether Donnie has actually seen this film. There was a famous skit years ago, 25 years ago on Saturday Night Live, the missing final reel of It's a Wonderful Life, where everyone discovers that Mr. Potter had stolen the money. And so they all gang together and they beat him, probably to death. Anyway, Mr. Potter is certainly an unlikable, despicable man. The movie portrays him as a heartless, cold man. While this may be the case, he may not be inherently evil. Mr. Potter cares only for himself and his money, but at the end of the day, he is helping the town regardless of his ulterior motives. How exactly is he helping the town? Bedford Falls may not want his help, but the fact is, he is helping. Is this written by someone in the 5th grade? Of course, calling the cops on George just to get him out of the picture is an awful thing to do, but not evil, you understand. But he did technically break the law. Mr. Potter is a bad man, and seeing him lose his grip on George was the happy kind of trope fans love to see. But in the end, he was just a businessman, nothing more. So a businessman can't be evil, or perhaps evil is simply baked into being a businessman. George willing to leave his family with nothing. Shortly before George met Clarence, he was at his absolute low point. It doesn't take a detective to deduce what he was thinking on that bridge, but the consequences of going through with it would have left his family in financial ruins. George was on the brink of losing his business, and he knew this would hurt his family's stability. That's one way to put it. However, he could have always bounced back, but without him, his family would have been far worse off in more ways than one. Yes, bounced back from losing the savings and loan going under, and him being criminally charged and likely imprisoned. It's debatable as if George was serious about it. Really? After all, he saved Clarence without thinking twice. But if he was, it would have been selfish on his part. Again, Donnie here seems to be gobsmacked that people are selfish. He felt his family would have been better off without him, and realizing he was wrong makes this one of those Christmas movies with the best rewatched values. But for a moment, he was willing to leave his family with nothing. Uh-oh, now we get to the misogyny. Mary is nothing without a man in her life. When George sees how different Bedford Falls would be without him, one of the biggest changes was with his wife, Mary. Instead of just having married someone else, she is a poor library spinster. This is portrayed as negative because she is single. There is nothing wrong with an adult living their life single, but here it is treated as a tragedy because Mary shouldn't be alone because she is a woman. This is the distracting plot point that almost comes off as a bit sexist by today's standards. Besides this glaring issue, the movie is still an icon and it mostly blah, blah, blah. You keep saying that. You keep saying that. Actually, this has been changed, this article. The original version of it said that she was selfish. And why was she selfish? She was selfish because she didn't work for a living. There was only one salary in the family, but she did nothing but stay home, keep the house and look after the children. I guess the housewives of America reacted poorly to this. One wonders whether these stories are not written deliberately in such a way as to, invite execration. There is a very strong suggestion in It's a Wonderful Life that Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed are made for each other. I don't know whether Donnie, movie buff, has ever seen enough movies to understand that this is a very popular trope, as he would say, the man and woman who are made for each other. But in the absence of George Bailey, I guess, Donna Reed would become a librarian. Recasting It's a Wonderful Life in 2021. I don't even know whether I want to look at this. This is from the screenrant.com, same source, by Katarina Daly. Bert and Ernie, Keegan-Michael Key, and Jordan Peele. Okay. I gather they're not a team anymore. And there's a lot of envy there because one of them, Jordan Peele, has become a very big deal in Hollywood, and the other, Keegan-Michael Key, has not. Young George Bailey, Ian Armitage. I don't know who Ian Armitage is. Zuzu Bailey, Michelle Harris. Oh, okay. So that would mean that it's a black family now. Okay. All right. Harry Bailey, Enver Jokaj. I'm not sure if I know this fellow either. Mr. Gower, Mandy Patinkin. Okay. Uncle Billy, Wallace Shawn. There's kind of an air of malevolence in Wallace Shawn, Of course, the original actor who played him had sort of blundering quality to him. Henry Potter, played by Kelsey Grammer. Yeah, I suppose so. Clarence Oddbody, played by Leslie Jordan. Again, I don't know who this character is, Leslie Jordan. Just let me look him up here. Oh, he appears in Hearts of Fire and Will and Grace. And, okay. And let me scroll down here. Oh, and he is an alphabet person. Yes, I had that. There was that suggestion there. Yeah. So we'd make the angel gay. Golly, just like in Sodom and Gomorrah. No, the opposite of that in Sodom and Gomorrah. But yeah, of course. Mary Hatch Bailey, Susan Kalechi Watson, also okay, so yeah. George Bailey, Jason Sudeikis. So he has a black wife and a black daughter. Okay, all right. Where's the trans representation? That's my question. I mean, how can you have a movie without trans representation? Here's another article that was pointed out to me, which again is further proof, if you like, of the hypothesis that these stories are written deliberately to anger people, and that, let's say, there could be a lack of sincerity. This is from the spinoff.co.nz, that would be New Zealand. This is by George Driver. No laughing matter. Why it's time to cancel Facebook's haha reaction, triggered by an emoji. The haha emoji is poisoning Facebook. Created 11 years ago to express laughter, the emoji, officially dubbed grinning, squinting face, has become the emoji of ridicule. Every time I see that little ball of derision sitting at the bottom of news stories and posts, cackling at the pandemic, climate change, inequality, actually anything where someone is trying to make the world a better place, my faith in humanity slips a little further. Well, I'm training myself not to click on Facebook's comment section and that addictive rush of outrage of reading the horrendous views of strangers. The haha emoji is unavoidable. It takes just one person to click that avatar of vitriol and the post, and my newsfeed is tainted forever. Even on stories where the comments are turned off, you'll still find that little androgynous face of scorn. My experience of social media is now like being followed everywhere by Nelson Muntz from The Simpsons. Like every earnest view I hold is a source of belittlement for the world. In a way, it has become the emoji of the moment, the emoji of Brexit. Brexit? That was 6 years ago. Donald Trump and the anti-vaxxers, a weapon of the trolls at the time of the culture wars. So how did the emoji of joy become the emoji of hate? Yeah, okay. And it goes on and on and on. Okay, some Guardian columnist, Abby Wilkinson, called it an obnoxious, chortling little yellow dickhead. When I look at its yellow face, I see the detestable, carefree smirks of Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson as they merrily dance through the current chaos, hop, skip, and jumping over the cracks in society. They've helped drive deeper and wider, safe in the knowledge they'll personally be fined no matter what. Okay. And it goes on for hundreds of more words. But do we want social media to be forever polluted with the sneering face of contempt and derision? After 5 years, there seems to be only one solution. Just like Lonely Lingerie, Charlie Chaplin, and all musicals, it's time to cancel the haha emoji. Bring back the like and the LOL if we must, but grinning, squinting face must be excommunicated from Facebook and purged from our news feeds forever. Although I know which emoji I'll see when this story pops up on Facebook. Okay, apparently this fellow doesn't like musicals, and Charlie Chaplin must be canceled for some reason. And there's a story linked here by Alex Bray from the spinoff. Yes, cancel the Charlie Chaplin musical and don't stop there. Okay. Oh, his unsavory conduct toward women. Yeah. Do we really know a lot about that? And Lonely Lingerie. I had never heard of Lonely Lingerie, so I looked it up. Apparently, it's a successful lingerie company based, I believe, in the United States that makes lingerie for women. Okay. They're not wearing this lingerie. This is skimpy lingerie to attract men. No, they're doing so to feel better about themselves. Why this would need to be canceled is an interesting question. From last year, another example of the story, which seems to have been written solely to inspire outrage and a host of questions like, has he even seen these films? This is John Mendelsohn at CBR.com. And who is John Mendelsohn when he is at home? John Mendelsohn is a graduate of Ithaca College with a degree in film. He is a writer, filmmaker, and lover of anything and everything pop culture. When not writing or binge watching Netflix, John loves to travel and find all of the hottest foodie spots. So he's a bug man, in other words. The article is called Why Stanley Kubrick Was Never Able to Tap into His Full Potential. Stanley Kubrick may have had a visionary mind, but his own toxic masculinity and tyranny restrained him from ever truly growing. Oh, yeah, okay. Because that's what you most notice in Stanley Kubrick's films, is that they're all the same. Although, without a doubt, yeah, okay, the obligatory comment or the obligatory compliment before we start tearing them apart. Without a doubt, one of the most talented filmmakers of all time, visionary auteur, Stanley Kubrick was never able to tap into his true potential because of his toxic masculinity and obsession with the gender binary, among other things. His films are so colorful and artistic, yet never allow women to be the main focus. Yeah, okay. It felt like Kubrick was almost afraid of femininity unless it was there to serve a man or please the eyes. You mean like Nicole Kidman in Eyes Wide Shut? Hmm? Or Marie Windsor in The Killing? Hmm? She was certainly there. She wasn't pleasing her husband or serving him, was she? Despite his immense talent, Kubrick was so stubborn and close-minded and never allowed himself to receive back from his cast and crew. Kubrick was famous for asking everyone on the set for suggestions. He said there are no bad ideas, and he said you don't need to worry about it because if it works, I'll claim the credit for it. He also refused to treat them as his team. That's why several of them worked with him in picture after picture after picture, as if he always needed to be in control. Well, someone has to be in control, which in turn hurt his films more than he ever knew. To put it simply, if Kubrick was never brainwashed by stereotypes, who knows what kind of masterclass filmmaking he could have achieved. There's just so many buzzwords, so many weasel words in these kinds of stories. I mean, how long does it take to write them? 10, 15 minutes? And of course, the business about toxic masculinity is hilarious because, to use the word masterclass, Kubrick's film provide a masterclass in toxic masculinity. So where are we getting this? Well, someone called Thomas Guycott tweeted the answer here, which is we pay a freelancer to say a thing you think is dog shit because the Google Facebook duopoly ate the whole digital ad market, and now harvesting hate clicks is the only viable business model for online media. And of course, this story was the original one from Screen Rant about It's a Wonderful Life was heavily ratioed, as the kids are saying. But again, that seems to be the point. The same one who made the viral tweet, Sideshow Bob Mitchum, said Frank Capra phoning Gen Z to figure out how the hell he's supposed to end It's a Wonderful Life now that movie characters aren't allowed to blow their tops under any circumstances. See, Dr. Handsome at Soviet Disco says the reason It's a Wonderful Life holds up so well is that George's line, you know how long it takes a working man to save $5,000, has not aged even slightly. Oh, yes, here it is. Mary did nothing to help support the family. She just stayed home and cooked, cleaned, and raised the kids. Golly, I might call the Donnie there a misogynist, actually. And let's go to the chat. Hello to Dan, Anron, William Hicks, Dawn from Beyond, Red Sulphur, Don Willis, Mr. Marvel, Dr. Deadname, Emmett Kelly's Earth, Hauper. Let's see, how's Mom? Jokin666, hello, asks of Red Sulphur. He responds, thanks, she is stable and doing pretty well. That was a close call. Thanks to all for the kind e-thoughts and e-prayers. William Hicks says, I recall an article in the Wall Street Journal on the U.S. Geological Survey. A very dry scientist said there was something like a 72.9% chance of the big one in the next 20 or 30 years, maybe. That's the problem with the big one. The big one could happen tomorrow, and there could be another big one you know, a month later or a year later. On the other hand, the big one might not come for 100 years or 500 years or who knows when. Uh, something. Gameston says the SNL "It's a Wonderful Life" gag was one of their best. Don Willis says Christmas Miracle have avoided awkward gifts from business associates thus far. Awkward gifts? Business associates of my father used to give him things like a case of scotch. Chogakin666 says, I had a dream last night the church I was christened in was abandoned and being demolished. Dr. Dename says this is one of those writers struggling to create a hot, controversial take. Here's my hot, controversial take on It's a Wonderful Life, which I wrote about in Chronicles some years ago. That George's life is saved by a whip round. Oh, let's raise money for George. George has been, so good to us. It's time for us to be good to him. Okay. Well, that was pretty easy. There's other problems there. I should imagine that a fair number of people in Bedford Falls, including even his wife and his daughter, are going to be somewhat shy of George after that extraordinary outburst. Also, the teacher and her husband. And it is just the overwhelming, emotional outburst from him. Here I am stuck in this hick town for all of my life. I could have gone anywhere. I could have done anything. And I sacrificed my life for you, and for what? And it's a Wonderful Life is such a harrowing film, It's certainly true to life enough, but it's kind of an odd Christmas choice for that reason, because I suspect that the movie is going to have, let's say, a negative effect on a lot of people who see it and look at their own, compare their own lives, to say that of George Bailey's. Love the scene where they use their honeymoon money to save the bank, have $2 left, and everyone dances in celebration on the way to putting them in the vault, says William Hicks. Yes. Yes, of course. It's a Wonderful Life can also be seen as a savage critique of fractional reserve banking. Okay, what else do we have? Donna Reed was gorgeous, says William Hicks. Yes, I think that if you polled men, well, certainly men of a certain age, and asked them best Hollywood wife ever, yeah, Donna Reed would win easily. David Wright says, met Zuzu actress at a showing of the movie at an old historical movie theater a few years back. Palcasso88 says to Anwin, thanks for mentioning Mary Stuart Masterson last night. Now I can't get the image of her drumming out of my head. Red Sulfur says the Sackler family may have had their civil immunity lifted recently. Dr. Deadname says, yes, the androgynous face of scorn laughs at your tears. Some people would be happier without access to the internet. 95% of women, I would say. Hello to Denny McDougall. Thank you for your kind words. Drove Kubrick driving Shelley Winter crazy is a meme. Yeah, I know that. I've talked about this in many places, even on this live stream, that I'm sure Kubrick, well, I'm absolutely certain he noticed the same thing that I have and many other people have, is that you have people in horror movies who are supposed to be terrified. They don't act terrified. So what he wanted out of Shelley Duvall was that she actually act terrified. And she does, and it's a revelation. Chogokin666 says, sad how Kubrick's genius remained unfulfilled. Gameston says, bugmen do not understand art comes from pain. Did you guys see Linda Carter slagging J.K. Rowling for her anti-trans stance, says Buddy. The Wonder Woman, Linda Carter? Wow. I mean, isn't she like about 80 years old now? I mean, why would she worry about this? Metal Mike says Ontario's top doctor, that would be Dr. Kieran Moore, is it? Said even if your elderly relative is triple jabbed and you are double jabbed, you should not visit them this Christmas. Hello to Dionysus. William Hicks says, Kevin, if you had to compare Kubrick to some other artists of stature in painting, sculpture, literature, who would you pick? Oh, I don't know. Goethe, although Goethe was also a scientist, so perhaps that comparison won't work. And Dionysus says, I called a modern church and spoke to a modern priest and roasted him like I have done to very few. I don't know. Let's see. I'm sure they forgave George because of the extreme nature of what had happened to him. Plus, I think he had largely gotten over his never fulfilled dreams by that stage of his life, says Anne Run. Well, I mean, look at Uncle Billy, right? Uncle Billy was clearly incompetent, but George kept him around in a position of authority. One, because, he was family, and two, because he didn't want to be seen to be mean-spirited to an old man. But it was, as we found out, that was not a good choice. Brian Adams, who was fully vaxxed and caught COVID twice, canceled his Vancouver show on New Year's Eve. LOL, says Dan. Okay. What are we going to talk about now? We are going to talk about, just a little paragon to my discussion on the Canadian real estate market a couple of days ago. This is from Kenneth Chan at Urbanized at dailyhive.com. Vancouver house prices expected to soar 12% to a median of $1.9 million in 2022. And then there's a picture of a type of house which is known as a Vancouver Special. And I lived in a Vancouver Special for from 1970 to 1973 in East Vancouver, right across the street from Vancouver Technical High School. And just the thought of someone paying $1.9 million for a Vancouver Special. Wow. I'm just trying to imagine the buyer's remorse there. I'm also wondering where the money comes from, but then I know actually, because their parents are using their own homes as ATM machines. The federal government's 3-year plan that began in 2020 of allowing 1.2 million immigrants into Canada over 3 years is also expected to bring a surge of new housing demand, especially in the housing markets of Vancouver and Toronto. This president CEO of Royal LePage says the lack of housing supply in Canada is a very real issue, as has been pointed out by others. The amount of housing stock in Vancouver has increased enormously in the last few decades, but it can't keep up with the number of people that are coming to Vancouver. And this is from Stephen Davis at CBC News. A Toronto police officer leaked information to Sun knowing he would use for crime, lawsuit alleges. A Toronto detective constable knew his son was involved in criminal activity when he gave him confidential police information that was later used to commit a murder and home invasion, a lawsuit alleges. The allegation is found in a statement of claim filed by the family of Bill Horace, who was killed in London, Ontario in June 2020. Horace was accused before his death of committing atrocities during Liberia's civil war. So here we have a Toronto police officer who was killed in a gang dispute, and he'd formerly been committing atrocities in Liberia's civil war. I'm reminded of a former Reform Party Alliance MP from the Punjab originally, who came to Surrey, BC, and brought out the instant army of party members in order to win nomination. Later, his wife became an MP as well. And later, he left the party because he was offered a bribe by the Liberal government. And this fellow had boasted. He started running for office about 2 or 3 years after he arrived in my country. He had boasted of his service to the homicidal Staff Sergeant Samuel K. Doe of guess which country. It seems to be that Canada looks for the worst, not the best and the brightest, but the worst and the dimmest. Why on earth would we want people from Liberia? And, oh, this is pretty funny, particularly the reaction. This is from Ryan Saavedra at the Daily Wire. Billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk responded to Joy Reid's attack on him during her show Wednesday night by calling her a lobbyist for Senator Karen, referencing the new nickname that he recently coined for Senator Elizabeth Warren. Musk made the remark in response to Reid defending Warren for Musk's new nickname during a show last night. Musk's remarks toward Warren came after Warren suggested without evidence that Musk was freeloading off everyone else by not paying taxes. Well, he has sold billions of dollars on Tesla stock, and he's certainly going to be paying capital gains taxes on those benefits. This is Joy Ann Reid's response to this. Elon wasn't happy, so he did what he always did and stomped his little feet and insulted Senator Warren, calling her an angry mom and referring to her as Senator Karen for so many reasons, being a freeloader and a selfish and disrespectful one, and for misappropriating Black vernacular for misogynistic purposes. Elon Musk is the absolute worst. Okay, did you know that every word was invented by Black people? Every single one. So now there's hardly any word that white people can use. Well, oh no, this is a part of Black culture. Well, there's certain words. Cool is one. That certainly came from Black culture, but then it became universal. Funky is another one. I'm not going to tell you what funky originally meant because it would be offensive. But there's certain words that become universal. In fact, there's certain words that are, invented by white people. That is to say, most of them, which are used by Black people without any claims of cultural appropriation. Senator Karen. As I've said previously, Senator Warren reminds me of that social studies teacher from grade 10 that everyone hated. There's a story from Ken Bensinger and Jessica Garrison at Buzzfeed. The FBI said it busted a plot to kidnap Michigan's governor. Then things got complicated. The case seemed like a lock until an informant and one FBI agent were charged with crimes, another was accused of perjury, and a third was found promoting a private security firm. And that wasn't all. There's a problem, a longstanding problem with law enforcement agencies infiltrating terrorist groups. The infiltrators have to prove themselves to the terrorist groups, and this frequently involves committing acts of violence. As previously mentioned in this space, by the time of the First World War, most terrorist acts in Russia were not committed by terrorists. They were committed by government agents. The Okhrana, I believe the agency was called. But BuzzFeed wants us to understand that you can't cross a line here, okay? Just because this kidnapping operation seems pretty certain to have been a false flag operation, wait. The situation is complicated by the fact that the case has become a political lightning rod, with right-wing commentators calling it a prime example of government overreach. Some even baselessly assert that the Michigan investigation was a test run for what they claim was a false flag operation conducted on January the 6th. Well, when the Attorney General of the United States is asked directly whether there were government agents involved in organizing what happened on January 6th, and he refuses to answer. What does that tell you? Hmm? And it's a piece from the American Sun by Henry Delacroix. It appeared yesterday, called There Is No Recovery. The American regime recently leaked that they were worried about messaging about the amazing economic recovery Biden has guided. Regime media revealed this coordination, and subsequently, media personalities were singing the economy's praises. This is a hard sell because there is no real recovery. The claims of a recession in 2020 were true per the dictionary, as America saw 2 quarters of contraction. First quarter saw a small decline, and the second quarter witnessed the historic decline. This was unlike any other event in the course of GDP tracking. This was not a traditional inventory management recession, misaligned supply and demand. This was not a more modern, no more borrowers recession like 2000 and 2008. This was a political choice to shut the economy down. Purely political, as Democrats like AOC tweeted to not open up early and give Trump any aid. How political was this? Look no further than Disney. Florida allowed Disney World to reopen. California kept Disneyland shut down. Disney had data and protocols in Florida with real-time statistics to push on California. Did not work. The masses must be punished and given the opportunity to jettison Trump in exchange for a return to normalcy. Our politicians suspected that they could unplug and plug the economy back in like a router. The claims of millions of jobs created in 2021 ring hollow when everyone knows those jobs merely came back because governors allowed businesses to restart. People keep dying, but in spring we could come back. Thousands still die from COVID, but millions try to return to normal. So the real effect of COVID likely would have hurt tourism and large closed venues. Even then, it would have been a choice. The worker shortage is a weird problem no one has an answer for. I don't, but it is multivariable. Some people must have realized they were working to pay childcare. Immigration was paused. Employers still have not raised wages enough to entice others. I was looking for a gig while employed, as my employer was losing customers and was offered short severance as my firm shed headcount at the time I got a new offer. Due to a non-compete clause, I could not work for a few months. It was awesome. I spent tons of time with family. I had the best workouts. I wrote fiction, which may come out next year. How many Americans realized they didn't need their second income in their house or could get by with little less? What's there to buy anyway? That is why the broad-based inflation we see is killing regime messaging. Formerly, inflation was contained to assets, medical, and college costs. It could be tucked away and hidden out of statistical measurements by the CPI basket of goods. Hedonic adjustments, basket of goods shuffling, and the downward pressure of global wage arbitrage worked as globalization developed. That is gone. Inflation is everywhere, as a flood of money chases a broken supply chain. They cannot stuff it back into the basement, and prices will rise as fewer units sold need to generate revenues to cover all that corporate debt. This is all at near zero interest rates. There will be no recovery, and all the messaging for one will fall flat. People can still remember 2019. People see inflation and shrinkflation with their eyes. NFTs, which stands for non-fungible tokens, they're all the rage, apparently, for a reason I cannot possibly understand. Sports betting and video game accessory hoarding are all a symptom of a broken economy with too much money sloshing around. America, the car nation, cannot even deliver the chariots of freedom to its citizens. This isn't a recovery in any form. The question is if we see 70s stagflation, an Argentinian corralito, or actual hyperinflation. There is no going back. For political gain, people you wouldn't leave in charge of a gas station carnival thought they could flip the off switch on a $20 trillion machine. And, okay. Joe Biden, it looks as if he is about to be carried off by the Grim Reaper, and has for some time now. So I guess he's decided to get ahead of the game and play the Grim Reaper himself. This is from Stephen Nelson at the New York Post. President Biden said he sounded like he'd been watching Game of Thrones as he warned yesterday that the unvaccinated will soon overwhelm U.S. hospitals and vaccine refusers will experience a severe winter of severe illness and death. It's here now and it's spreading and it's going to increase, Biden said of the new Omicron variant of COVID-19 at the White House, seated near his chief medical advisor, Dr. Science. For the unvaccinated, we are looking at a winter of severe illness and death. The unvaccinated for themselves, their families, and the hospitals they will soon overwhelm. He urged people to seek out vaccine booster shots to prevent school shutdowns and business restrictions. Go get boosted if you've had your first 2 shots. If you haven't, go get your first shot. It's time. It's past time, Biden said. And we're going to protect our economic recovery if we do this. We're going to keep schools and businesses open if we do this. And I want to see everyone around enjoy that. I want to see them enjoy the fact that they're able to be in school and businesses are open and the holidays are coming. So Americans aren't allowed to enjoy the Christmastide unless Joe Biden approves. Biden took no questions, and it's unclear how U.S. officials determined that hospitals will be overwhelmed. Preliminary data from South Africa show lower rates of hospitalization due to milder symptoms than with past variants of the virus. According to the Associated Press, hospital admissions for adults diagnosed with COVID-19 in South Africa are 29% lower compared to in mid-2020, even after adjusting for vaccination status. Pfizer said last week that preliminary research indicates that the company's COVID-19 vaccine works against the Omicron variant. Yeah, especially after 3 doses. I'll be talking about some numbers from Ontario in just a couple of minutes. Do we have anything else in this story? This is from Breitbart and Charlie Spearing. Biden spoke to the press wearing a mask after meeting with his coronavirus advisory team at the White House. During his remarks, Biden struggled with his note cards, trying and failing to read off the number of Americans who had received a booster shot of the vaccine before members of his team stepped in to help him. He told reporters he would not take questions, but rather address the country on Friday on his further efforts to combat the virus. Oh, do we have anything new on that? See if there's anything on Drudge. No, Drudge is not updated very often. Let's try Citizen Free Press. See if there's anything there. Yeah, I don't know. What did Bill O'Reilly say? Hang on. Bill O'Reilly calls out Fox News for playing to the choir, claims he told Trump that 2020 stolen election argument was a loser. And moving on, the endless story. Oh, Dr. Science is about to move the goalposts again, because that's what he's best at. I mean, besides the science and besides being the most trusted man in the world, perhaps the most trusted man ever. This is from Chloe Taylor at CNBC. Fauci says a redefinition of fully vaccinated is on the table. Speaking to CNBC Squawk Box, Fauci said there was no doubt that optimum vaccination was with a booster dose. Well, for now. Currently, individuals are considered to be fully vaccinated either 2 weeks after their second dose of a 2-dose series. Yeah, and that's curious, that gap of 2 weeks. Why would that be? I think we can figure out why. Or 2 weeks after a single-dose vaccine, such as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Yes, it's on the table, which means it's almost certainly going to happen. Here's a story by Henry F. Smith Jr. at American Thinker. It's been nearly 2 years since the first inklings of a respiratory infection in China that would turn the world upside down. In a rational society, this would be the point where we realize that our attempts to vaccinate against this infection have failed. Yet we persist in our devotion to the sacred serum that will deliver us from our distress. Currently, 60% of adults in the United States are fully vaccinated. That's not nearly enough, say the pro-vaccinators. But exactly 0% of the population was vaccinated in 2020, and the number of deaths was lower. That is a profound fact that cannot be ignored. The truth is, there have been multiple attempts to create vaccines for coronaviruses. The efforts have been uniformly unsuccessful. First, these are respiratory viruses, which tend to be somewhat more difficult to immunize against. One big problem is if you create a strong immune reaction in the lung tissues where the virus resides, the patient can develop respiratory failure. This is what happens in severe cases of COVID-19 and sometimes post-vaccination. A second problem is called antibody-dependent enhancement, which is a phenomenon where waning vaccine effectiveness allows the virus to actually infect the killer cells meant to target the infection. This effect makes a subsequent infection much more severe. These issues have apparently been insurmountable in the past. It looks as though that is true again. Up to August 2021, the Centers for Disease Control defined vaccination as follows, quote, vaccine, a product that stimulates a person's immune system to produce immunity to a specific disease, protecting the person from that disease. Vaccines are usually administered through needle injections, but can also be administered by mouth or sprayed into the nose. Vaccination, the act of introducing a vaccine into the body to produce immunity to a specific disease, unquote. On September the 1st, the CDC surreptitiously changed these definitions as a result of the failure of its efforts. One definition now reads, quote, vaccine, a preparation that is used to stimulate the body's immune response against diseases. And how has that turned out? Yes, there's a lot of panic over Omicron, but this is almost a surreal situation, because here we have a story from news.com.au, that's Australia, by staff writers, working from a story originally from the London Sun. Omicron or cold, how to tell the difference? COVID-19 cases are spiking in Eastern Australia. So how do you tell the difference between the common cold and Omicron? That question should give people pause, shouldn't it? Omicron cases are climbing, and experts have said that symptoms are likely to differ from the three traditional COVID-19 symptoms. Alongside the worry of being infected with COVID, many people are also likely to suffer with a cold. The three common classic symptoms of COVID-19 include a new persistent cough, a high temperature, and a loss of taste and smell. But experts say the symptoms caused by Omicron are more like colds. Bugs and infections are everywhere, and it's important that you're able to distinguish between colds and COVID. But with UK data showing that close to a quarter of people with a cold actually have COVID, how can you do that? Well, I mentioned previously an enormous British survey, official survey, showing that millions of Britons have had COVID, or when they were tested and found out that they had been infected with COVID, they had no idea that this was the case. Jim Kunstler's column today, it is very rousing, and I urge you all to read it. You can find it as usual at kunstler.com. But because of rules, there's very little I can quote from it. It's titled, Where Do You Stand? The public health bureaucrat who styles himself as the science is at it again. In his quest to eliminate the control group, Dr. Fauci reiterated his warning that the nation faces a crisis of the unvaccinated. Omicron is upon us, he told a U.S. Chamber of Commerce meetup this week, and the hospitals will soon be overwhelmed by the unvaxxed. Oh, really? Yes. Hasten the destruction of the U.S. economy and our culture in order to consolidate the bureaucrats' own power to coerce and control the population, clear the offices, shut down the social spaces, make ordinary business as difficult as possible, cancel Christmas. That'll get her done. Yes, and he talks about treatments, and I can't mention anything about treatments. The Omicron moment may be this power-mad little weasel's last stand. Reports so far indicate that Omicron is a mild form of the virus. The one death reported to date did not include any information about the patient's comorbidities. Dr. Fauci is now warning that America's hospitals will be overwhelmed and that it will be the fault of the unvaxxed. Consider this. He predicted the same thing for the first wave of the virus in the winter of 2020, and then the giant emergency hospital set up in New York's convention center was never used, nor was the U.S. Naval Hospital ship brought up for COVID duty. American doctors have proven to be cowards, cravens, zombies, and fools, facilitating this evil campaign. The question is, will the people of this land submit to continued coercion and to the engineered demolition of their lives? So far, we have not rolled over like the pathetically servile Europeans and Australians. Here, there is apparently some will to resist further pushing around by this demonic elite. Several federal judges recently defined clear constitutional red lines in their published decisions against the vax mandates. Plenty of ordinary citizens are furious over the insidious and insane incursions of the political wokery hitched to the COVID emergency, the race and gender hustles, the efforts to, I can't repeat that, the absurd spending programs aimed at countless grifting operations, the disastrous monetary inflation, and the invasion of opportunists from all over the world across our border with Mexico. Even at Christmas time, with all its transient preoccupations, it's not too much to ask, where do you stand? Well, as the old labor union song had it, which side are you on? And this is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. South African Health Minister Joe Fala said today that only 1.7% of COVID cases in the current Omicron wave are being hospitalized, compared to 19% in the previous wave, and that the vast majority of cases are fairly mild. Good news, right? Good news. You'd think so. And in the I can hardly believe that this is happening file, this is from Andrew Mark Miller at Fox News. A low dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech corona vaccine has failed to produce an adequate response in children aged 2 to 5 years of age. The companies announced the results from ongoing critical trials Friday and said that after testing children 6 months to 5 years of age with 1/10 of the adult dose, children between 6 months and 2 years produced an immune response similar to people aged 16 to 25 after 2 doses, but children between 2 and 5 did not. So what to do? The companies will amend their clinical study evaluating the safety, tolerability, and immunogenicity of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine in children 6 months to under 5 years of age. The study will now include evaluating a third dose, at least 2 months after the second dose of the 2-dose series, to provide high levels of protection in this young age. The company said if the 3-dose study is successful, they plan to apply for emergency authorization sometime in the first half of 2022. A kid-sized version of the Pfizer's vaccine is already available for 5 to 11-year-olds. Once again, I can hardly wait until the show trials that we're going to have after this is all over. And from Steve Watson at Summit News, a resident doctor on CNN told viewers Thursday that they should all be wearing masks at home around other family members, and everyone should wake up on Christmas morning and, rather than open presents, take COVID tests. Perhaps we could all, walk around connected to tubes, have our heart rate measured and our blood pressure at all times, right? Just continuous monitoring of all the systems of our body, because one can't be too careful. Dr. William Schaffner also said that this restriction should apply to everyone, even those who are double and triple vaxxed. I recommend that we hang our stockings with care, Schaffner added. I don't want to read any more of this study because it's making me too angry, but I have lots of other stories. And again, this is about William Schaffner, and no, I'm not going to think about him anymore today. But again, I question what the purpose of, the college and university system is in the United States. Similarly, how about the hospital system? Apart from being an enormous grift that robs people, it's just barely a barely understandable level. It costs how much for that Tylenol? This is from Aram Sibarium at the Washington Free Beacon. The Biden administration will offer bonuses to doctors who create and implement an anti-racism plan under new rules from the Department of Health and Human Services, a movement to update Medicare payments to reflect changes in medical practice. Effective January 1st, Medicare doctors can boost their reimbursement rates by conducting a clinic-wide review of their practice's commitment to anti-racism. The plan should cover value statements and clinical practice guidelines, according to HHS, and define race as a political and social construct, not a physiological one. A dichotomy many doctors say will discourage genetic testing and worsen racial health disparities. Once again, race, no, that's totally made up. But racism is real. It's not only real, it's systemic. And we have this phenomenon of racialized communities. But how can they be racialized when there's no such thing as race? Here's someone who's clearly gone off his head, someone who's clearly not 16 annas to the rupee. That would be CNBC Mad Money host Jim Cramer. And this is, again, Steve Watson from Summit News. He's taken his personal vaccine mandate zeal a step further by declaring to his audience that, quote, the government has a right to force you to obey, unquote. Needless to say, the backlash was swift. Carol Markowitz responded, I miss the right to force you to obey in the Constitution, but go off. And let's see. When's the one, the comment that I like the best? If you were required to get the polio vax 3 times in 1 year and you still got polio, wouldn't you be asking questions too? Kramer had previously called for the U.S. military to forcibly inoculate the American people with the COVID injection. Sean Davis responded, tell me you just bought a metric buttload of pharma stock without telling me you just bought a metric buttload of pharma stock. Oh, and let's go to Ontario, the province of my birth. What are the numbers here? Vaccines, because we know that vaccines work, and more Ontarians are getting vaccinated. So, of course, the number of new cases is going to fall precipitously, not so fast. This is from Chris Herholt at CP24. Ontario is reporting 3,124 new cases of COVID-19 Friday, the highest total reported since early May 2021, with the number of infections among unvaccinated and vaccinated people now more closely reflecting their proportions of the general population. Golly. 5 more deaths were reported in the last 24 hours. So, of the 21 new cases, sorry, no, I got that wrong. 3,124 of those. Let's have the rundown here. 130 have an unknown vaccination status. 96 involve partially vaccinated people. 778 involve unvaccinated people. And 2,120 involve fully vaccinated people. I'm struggling to formulate a response to that, one that would be, legal under terms and conditions. But the words, I think, efficacy and vaccine and failing, I think that they would be involved in that sentence. Oh, UHN infectious disease specialist Dr. Isaac Bogach told CP24 that Ontario is sitting on the cusp of a really large wave. Yeah, okay. Oh, weeks and weeks and months away. Golly, it's as if they don't want the crisis to end. Oh. And, well, tomorrow's going to be lit in Ontario. Again, from CP24, Ontario will embark on an inspection blitz at businesses tomorrow to ensure they're following public health measures. The Minister of Labour said 150 provincial offences officers will be deployed across Ontario They'll focus their efforts on big box stores, bars, salons, and other high-risk settings. Big box stores are especially high-risk settings. The thing about big box stores is that they're huge. They're not only huge in terms of their floor space, the ceilings are really, really high. But I suppose Omicron has developed a way around that, just as it must have outside, because I see more and more people wearing masks outside, even in Victoria, which is typically quite a windy city. Let's check the panic meter at Bruce Arthur of the Toronto Star. I tweeted today that he's the latter-day Canadian version of the fat boy in Charles Dickinson's The Pickwick Papers, who says, "I wants to make your flesh creep." Oh, yeah, just do it. Just do it. That's his message. Question then is how much more severe? It moves so fast that it has to be a huge reduction in severity to make up for it, like 10 times. Oh, Matt Gurney, who's also completely off his head, by probably early next week, starting already, Ontario's test capacity will max out. It will be our version of Chernobyl's 3.6 Röntgen scene. We'll hit a max of what we can measure. I have no guesses how severe it'll be, but we'll only see it, if anything, in the hospitals. Arthur says, this is correct. We will fly blind. We will fly blind. Oh, and Bruce Arthur is not happy with our NDP government in British Columbia. The more things change in the pandemic, the more things stay the same in British Columbia's response. Love to be right while simultaneously canceling my New Year's plan, says Justin McElroy, who is, he works for CBC. But of course, it's not just conservative governments that can flub this stuff, comments Bruce Arthur. Ford isn't wrong, Arthur writes, that booster expansion might be chaotic, but it's to the good and it's been fast. Again, blunt force. Get stuff done. Do what you can. It's going to be a mess. Yeah. Something like, 20% of Ontarians have already got the third booster shot? So when I was looking at the update in British Columbia, I noticed that from the CBC does not tell us the new cases, how many of them are vaccinated and unvaccinated. I know why. The numbers are exploding, but there's a hint here. From December 8th to 14th, people who are not fully vaccinated accounted for 46.3%, and from December 1st, they accounted for 70.2% of hospitalizations, according to the province. Well, these numbers are, it's coming like this. And of course, we know that in Ontario, they said you can get a shot, 3 months after your last shot. Okay. What are they telling you there about efficacy? In one state, in Germany, you can get a booster 4 weeks after your last shot. And this is from Elizabeth Weiss at USA Today. Full vaccination against COVID-19 and a breakthrough infection builds super immunity, study finds. Okay. And again, this is Buzzfeed related. Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Buzzfeed staff who attended a company party in New York tested positive for COVID, despite wearing masks, showing vaccine passports, and being triple jabbed. And, something interesting in Italy. We may be returning to an end of government monopoly on violence. I mean, political violence, not criminal violence. George Sorel wrote about this, stating that he thought this was a disaster and that it would mean that all governments would become quite corrupt because politicians really had nothing to fear for being corrupt and for making, disastrous mistakes. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? They can be forced to resign. That hardly ever happens. And, if they leave office and everything falls apart, well, they can always blame it on the new guy. The NFL is requiring a third shot for all coaches and employees. And vaccination of Italian soldiers or members of the Italian military has been made mandatory. And coincidentally, the building which stores all the vaccines mysteriously caught on fire. Shameful, shameful behavior. Just shameful. And what do we have here? Hang on a second. What do we have here? Let me bring this up. Oh, yes, this is the Italy, after the mandatory vaccination for all security forces approved, the military warehouse where the vaccines were stored magically catches fire. That's from Tio Anon 17 at Telegram. And let's go to the chat. I mean, I think that we've moved into good news territory here, because the narrative, despite all the censorship, despite all the bans, despite all the canceling, the narrative cannot be maintained. Keep in mind that this booster shot, well, 1 shot's the trick, no 2 shots the trick, no 3 shots the trick. It's not a different thing from shots 1 and 2. It's just the same thing. So eventually we're going to run into, they're going to be telling us that people need to be vaccinated, what, every month? Every week? Contra Cruz says this process is called cost shifting. It's why everything costs so much nominally. Anran says, if they don't want the crisis to end, doesn't that suggest, well, yes. Why not just get a shot every day, says Oscar Toe. Emmett Kelly's Earth says, I still say COVID is an imbalance of the humors, and I think the humor that's imbalanced is yellow bile, and it's imbalanced among our leaders. Contra Cruz says, U.S. hospitals must see people irrespective of their ability to pay due to a law called EMTALA. Many uninsured patients refuse to pay anything. Hospitals inflate the bill for those who do pay. Well, I'll repeat my own solitary story of my experience with the United States healthcare. When I was living and working in San Diego, we had a medical plan that used to be really common in business. And it's been so long since I've heard the name that I've forgotten what they used to call these plans, these group plans. Anyway, I guess Tuesday or Wednesday of the working week, I was in bad shape. And about half the time I thought I was going to vomit, and the other half I thought I was going to faint. And so I called up my provider, and we can make an appointment for you on Friday. And I said, no, Friday isn't going to work. There's something seriously wrong with me. And, it's acute. Well, you can just go to the emergency ward, they said. Oh, I can go to the emergency ward. Okay, fine. So I go to the emergency ward at the local hospital, and I spend a couple of hours there, and being forced to march across hundreds of feet dressed in one of those gowns where you're practically naked. Anyway, so they do a bunch of tests, and they say that I have a prostate gland infection. Okay, all right. So, we'll give you this, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I felt better. Well, while I felt better. And then a few weeks later, I got a bill from the hospital, and it was either $4,000 or $7,000, but I was so shocked. I just crumpled it up and threw it away. I'm not looking at that again. You see, the thing is, they didn't tell me that I would be, subject to a bill of thousands of dollars for taking their advice to go to the emergency ward. I just had the assumption that it was covered under the plan. Dionysus says, though I'm not a practicing Catholic, it is not difficult to see where the church is going if it is not fought for. It makes one bitter to feel as if one cares more for the future generations than those who have more skin in the game. Maybe COVID Vax Flakes for breakfast, says a Teleologic Jones. Okay. Who else do we have? Could be ADE, says Dan. Yes, indeed. Hello to Debreus and Brandon Smith, who says elites during 1918 flu never wore masks. Plenty of pics. Red Sulfur says, comfort ye my people. And who else do we have here? Oh, Red Sulfur says, how about that ridiculous ad about the starving old Jewish ladies on Fox? Well, at first I thought they're obviously not in Israel, because they'd be taken care of there. I just got the assumption that they're in, I don't know, Ukraine or Belarus or some such place. I've seen that ad many times, and it is quite affecting because no one likes to see, people in their 80s, starving or, living in shacks. Okay. I think that's it. Oh, spooky KMG voice, says Popcasso 88. Her Indian name, Liz Warren, is Angry Rattlesnake, says Red Sulfur. I like Pocahontas, actually, the best. And let's go to William Briggs's column, or his blog, actually. Oh, he's talking about his podcast. Like last week, I did the Conservative Casual Friday Never-Ending COVID-19 Mania podcast with Andrew Herod. Okay, so you can find that. And at Eugippius, the latest is Containment Across the World, Reader Reports, Part 2. And yes, it's not happy reading. The United States seems to be, and Sweden seems to be the center of resistance to the panic, although I'm told that things are changing in Sweden rather rapidly. And let's go to AB's Substack. Pandemia is now $2.99 on Kindle. That is his book. This is from a South African reader, which is behind a paywall, so I can't read that. But this one I like. COVID is over. And panic porners like David Leonhardt are going to sorely regret this last spasm. Fewer than 1 in 50 people with confirmed Omicron cases are being hospitalized in South Africa, which suggests that the actual hospitalization to infection rate is far lower still, because so many people with Omicron have such mild cases they won't be bothered to be tested. And the wave of new cases seems to have peaked. It is over well and truly. And so is the last shred of any credibility for public health authorities, governments, and the media. Of course, they were disastrously wrong about Iraq, leading to the invasion and failed occupation. How many, besides Judith Miller, who was the scapegoat of the New York Times, how many people suffered? Did David Frum suffer? No, he did not. He's now writing for the Jobs Widows blog. And even New York is done with mandates, seen at an excellent deli in the reliably blue Hudson Valley town of Beacon. Governor, in scare quotes, Kathy Hochul, has decreed that if you are not seated and dining, then you must be wearing a mask. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. And that absurd New York Times scare piece this morning, Omicron threatens red America. Because, they deserve it, right? I emailed David about it this morning. That piece was, problematic, as I'm guessing the Trump County data. Note, these are figures David has repeatedly published showing more COVID deaths in counties that voted for Trump, which also tend to have lower vaccination rates, is completely confounded by age. Trump voters are older, and obesity. The southern states that have the most Trump voters are also more obese. And in the southern counties that went hard for Trump, the Democratic voters are more obese too, as they are likely African Americans. And African Americans, unfortunately, have notably higher rates of severe obesity. Yes, they do play the same trick in Canada. Let's compare any province in Canada to Florida. When Florida is doing quite well, the population in Florida skews quite old. People go there to retire. Also, the population of Florida is, on average, considerably fatter than the population of any Canadian province. And what does Professor Pantsdown have to say? This is from Connor Boyd at the Daily Mail. Professor Lockdown Neil Ferguson warns of 5,000 Omicron deaths a day unless tighter restrictions return in a week or two. Yeah, he's been wrong about everything else, but maybe he'll be right this time. Boris Johnson's Conservative Party was embarrassed in a by-election yesterday. They were trounced. This was a seat they'd won in the previous election easily. North Shropshire, and the Liberal Democrats won by over 6,000. They were 6,000 votes ahead. And a former British MP said that he calls for Boris Johnson to resign, and this is a verdict. The vote was a verdict on the failure of his leadership. Hard to disagree. And let's go to dailyskeptic.org. And Dr. Ronald Salmon says Christmas should not be canceled. This is from Talk Radio. I don't think personal restrictions have delivered anything in public health terms. The impact of lockdown on the data is less dramatic than our mathematically inclined colleagues predict. Finally, YouGov poll finds public opposed to lockdown. Finally, indeed. Oppose or support pubs and restaurants being shut, 60-30 oppose. Non-essential shops being shut, 65-26 oppose. A ban on indoor meeting with people from other households, 62-28 oppose. A ban on indoor meeting people from other households on Christmas Day, 68-22 oppose. Pubs, bars, and restaurants not being allowed to open on New Year's Eve, 53-36 oppose. Yes, and back to Professor Pantsdown, Toby Young comments, as usual, the fact that he's got more or less every previous forecast wrong does not mean he won't be taken seriously. And many skeptics are quite cheered by Time Magazine's selection of Elon Musk as its Person of the Year because Musk has been one of the most prominent COVID-19 skeptics from the beginning. Wales to tighten COVID restrictions immediately after Christmas. Come on. If Omicron were a clear and present danger, you wouldn't say, yeah, we have to wait until after Christmas Day, or we have to wait until after New Year's Day. No, you do it now. If you really thought, again, this is a clear and present danger. And let's talk Darren Beattie, who, as you know, I have high regard for. He said something in an interview about Britain being a bad place, or one of the worst places on earth. I think you have to understand this. Yes, is Adam Townsend at Adam Scrabble tweeted, is Darren J. Beattie right? Is the UK the most ugly and evil society on earth? The context for this was that since England is the mother of liberty, that the abandonment of commitment to liberty, freedom, or the rule of law in England is especially distressing, which is certainly the way that I feel. I'm half British by birth. Cameron says, dual UK-US citizen. I agree with some of what Darren says, but I suspect some of the hyperbole is a result of not really understanding how things work in the UK. We're nowhere so far down the rabbit hole of identity politics wokery as the US, with laws less severe. I would say that, yes, again, this stuff comes from the United States. Critical race theory stuff. Let's talk of, systemic racism, white supremacy. This all comes from the United States, and the rest of the Anglosphere says, yeah, we can do that too. We're not a bunch of Hicks, But in a counter example, people have been talking about this story highlighted on libs of TikTok. Two teachers at a California school reportedly coached a 12-year-old into a trans identity behind her parents' back. The school also changed her name and pronouns without informing the parents, and the mother spoke before the school, and let's just say that she was angry, very angry indeed. The school reportedly called the parents in for a meeting where they informed them that their daughter is trans. The teacher then proceeded to call Child Protective Services on them when they didn't use the correct name and pronouns. Again, urge to kill must be suppressed. The teachers coaxed her to join an equality club, which was really a disguise for a gay straight alliance club, or as I like to say, a grooming parlor. These teachers were recorded at an event in November bragging about how they disguised the name of the Alphabet People Club so they can indoctrinate kids without any obstacles. And Libs of TikTok says, here's the full article on their plans to indoctrinate students while hiding it from their parents. It's absolutely appalling. And it is from the Epoch Times. It begins, leaked audio reveals how California recruits kids. Yeah, it's not, things are bad in England, not as bad as that, I don't think. And here's a story from Joel Kotkin, who is regularly featured on this live stream. It's Unheard. Western greed fuels China's domination. Our oligarchs prostrate themselves for profit. He begins, there is a hypocrisy at the heart of the West's attitude to China. Although we're constantly warned about the threat from Beijing, our political and corporate elites seem intent on making this century a Chinese one. Unlike in the 30s, this appeasement isn't driven by fear and ignorance. It is motivated largely by greed. And that greed could prove fatal. China's civilization state, deeply rooted in thousands of years of history, represents the most profound philosophical challenge to liberal values since the end of the Cold War. But our oligarchs choose to ignore this, preferring instead to genuflect to Beijing for financial gain. The cost of such avarice is slowly coming into focus. China's economy may surpass the US by as early as 2028, and by some measurements already has. The Middle Kingdom's ascendancy would not seem as inexorable if not for the efforts of the West's kowtow crowd, a group of self-interested cheerleaders and enablers of China's autocratic state. At the height of the Cold War, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev threatened that the USSR would bury the West. China's President Xi can count on the West burying itself. Some of this can be traced to naivety and the underestimation of Chinese capabilities. Rather than recognizing a potential threat, our political and financial elite saw a potential economic partner and huge market. China was still a poor developing country when it was welcomed into the World Trade Organization 20 years ago. It dutifully supplied cheap products to a welcoming market. In the meantime, it was hoped that exposure to the West would create an increasingly liberal China. No, I'll put it a little differently. We were told that there was no question that economic liberalization would mean political liberalization. And that was the solution to every problem on earth, was to give them the free market and just shove it down their throats. Well, it didn't happen in China, did it? And of course, to speak of a free market today is rather ridiculous. You know, it's rather ridiculous. It's a rigged casino. It's not my phrase, but it's a good one. And government intervention in the economies to help their buddies, buddies in the C-suites, and of course, corporations interfering in politics to help the people who are helping them. And the old rule, the capitalist old rule, that if you make stupid bets and you lose, well, you're just going to have to deal with it. No. These people have to be made whole. Well, if I decide to blow all my money on lottery tickets, is anyone going to make me whole? No, they're not. Oh, well, that's different. Well, how is it different? We cannot weaken the system, and we cannot impugn the integrity of the system. This would lead to ill effects. You mean like 2008? And what were all the reforms that happened after 2008? We'll talk about something else now, okay? Because there's nothing, it has to be done this way. The people with all the money have to be given more and more power, because how could that go wrong? Yeah. Of course, so many of the people who are friendly with China, they make a lot of money from being friendly to China. And of course, Canada has to destroy its economy, as part of our contribution to the eternal war against mankind's greatest enemy, carbon. But China's not going to do that. And we'll just pretend that that's not happening, because, people would ask the question, well, if China's not doing anything, why do we have to destroy our economy? For decades, American companies have been handing Beijing the basis for economic hegemony. Since 1990, U.S. deficit in trade goods with China has ballooned from under $10 billion annually to $419 billion last year. China's ratio of imports to exports was 4-1 in 2018. This has enriched many of our leading manufacturing companies, notably Apple, while costing an estimated 3.4 million job losses in the U.S. 2001. Meanwhile, these corporate kowtowers actively promote China's model. Apple, for instance, props up and profits from China's ever-expanding surveillance state. Acting as if it were its own country, Apple has essentially negotiated its own $275 million deal with China, promising to keep production there while assisting with the country's unhidden goal to supplant the West as a tech leader. And I should mention that in the book Boomers, it's pointed in the chapter on Helen Andrews' book, highly recommended, that Steve Jobs, for all his faults, kept pornography off the Apple system and insisted that no, he wasn't going to have his products made in China. No, they were going to be made in the United States. For its part, Wall Street, even amid the threat of government interference, plays its part in the kowtow game. Ray Dalio, founder of Giant Bridgewater Associates hedge fund and self-promoting author, has dismissed China's repression of its Uyghur population as the result of a sacrosanct desire for sovereignty. Even powerful figures such as Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan have decided to publicly apologize after upsetting the CCP. It's in their interest, after all. Xi knows fully well that the Western investment bankers and tech companies will do his bidding as long as they get what mafia dons may call a taste. China may be miffed if U.S. diplomats boycott the 2022 Winter Games, but they can ensure that the corporations and investment bankers will likely be their heads bowed on the floor. So before I go to the book club, I'm going to go back to the chat. Our officially unofficial state religion, says Halper. These people have unimaginable wealth. Why must they steal from us? It's not enough, says Chokakin 666. Dionysus says CRT is in our medical, legal, spiritual, and school system. It seems eerily similar to the methods used by the Chinese on the Falun Gong. Banksy is the U2 of art, says Chogoken 666. David Wright suggests go to Ramsey Paul today on the Salvation Army. Yes, I spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. They produced a document, new guidance for the Salvation Army, that all white people involved in the Salvation Army must apologize for their whiteness and make reparations for their whiteness. And as a result, Christmas contributions to the Salvation Army, cash, as well as goods such as toys and used toys and such like, have absolutely collapsed. From woke to broke, I guess it can happen very quickly. Hello to Grace Chapman. Iraq war architect to six-figure libtard entertainer pipeline. It says something Gamiston or Gameston. And okay, and what's the fun? We're living end of civilization time, says Ogun's Iron. Well, again, I always like to keep in mind what Herbert Stein said, and there's like 100 different versions of this, but I'll go with systems continue until they stop. And I bought tea. I will have some now, black tea. And I drink orange pekoe myself. Okay, the book I'm talking about today is called Political Tribes, and it is by Amy Chua, whose book World on Fire I spoke of a few months ago. Political Tribes, Group Instinct, and the Fate of Nations. And it is published by Penguin in 2018. And I have to say, this is a disappointment to me. It is rather diffuse, and it is based on the planted axiom of the book, I believe, is false. And I will get to that in a somewhat unusual way by quoting from a Substack called Remnant Posting. Conservatives ignoring race in politics won't make it go away. Now, Amy Chua, I guess, is what you would call a classical liberal. But since all the formal conservatives now call themselves classical liberals, it's a distinction without a difference. Conservatives ignoring race in politics won't make it go away. Republicans are right to view the left's radicalism as unhinged, but appealing to colorblindness is a losing strategy. Leftists, whether they're liberal identified or of the more radical varieties, have really gone mask off in the last few years. Notions that, not long ago, would have seemed totally unthinkable to the average person have become rapidly normalized. For instance, the use of using political violence to solve our differences used to be totally alien to most people. The reaction to the Rittenhouse verdict suggests that some Americans are perfectly willing to discuss this now. A tweet from November 19th of this year from Respectable Lawyer. The big lesson here is that you should not under any circumstances attempt to disarm one of these right-wing death squad dorks when they start shooting. Instead, you should shoot them. Many such cases, a remnant says. Rachel Zegler, pronouns she, her, hers, tweeted, Kyle Rittenhouse being acquitted on all charges after such heinous crimes is the epitome of white privilege and exactly what is wrong with this godforsaken country. Mainstream GOP-aligned commentators have belted a common refrain throughout the entire Rittenhouse saga. Why is the left making the case racial? Conservatives had better give that question some more thought and accept where it leads them, no matter how uncomfortable. As the saying goes, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. To understand how the left's narrative on the Rittenhouse case has evolved, we need to go back to the beginning. Here's what Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley said about the incident back in 2020. A 17-year-old white supremacist domestic terrorist drove across state lines. We know that's untrue. Armed with an AR-15. Untrue. He shot and killed two people who had assembled to affirm the value, dignity, and worth of Black lives. Fix your damn headlines. As far as Pressley is concerned, the totality of the mom's actions on that night are irrelevant. Her choice of words implicitly endorses the mob's actions by compressing them into the frame of affirming the value of Black lives. Any other behavior the assailants may have engaged in that night does not matter to her, not even if that behavior included destroying other people's livelihoods or attempting to murder a 17-year-old boy. Some conservative commentators, such as Jesse Waters and Larry Elder, may make this observation in passing, but it is rarely given the attention that it deserves. This dynamic is really the core of the issue. The left conceives of whiteness as an ideology that anyone can either reinforce or deconstruct through their actions. According to them, white people essentially stop being white when they take sufficiently drastic action to aid racial justice. Since you can't get any more drastic than giving your life for the cause, leftists naturally view Rittenhouse's assailants as heroic victims. Even after Kyle's hard-won exoneration, the sentiment has persisted with the exact same fervor. Nicole Hannah Jones, a.k.a. Ida Bay Wells, creator of the ahistorical 1619 Project, expressed this quite openly. In this country, you can even kill white people and get away with it if it is those white people who are fighting for Black lives. This is the legacy of 1619. The backlash to the not guilty verdict can tell us a lot about just how emotionally invested these racial activists were in seeing Rittenhouse go down for murder. Video evidence be damned. Throughout all of this racially charged drama, conservative pundits, politicians, and even Rittenhouse himself insisted that the case had nothing to do with race, despite the best efforts of racial activists to make clear their feelings on the matter. It can be very tempting to respond to claims, says Remnants posting at Substack, claims like these by merely pointing out their hypocrisy, as mainstream conservatives are prone to do. Imagine if the roles were reversed. If you, dear reader, are anything like this author, you can probably list dozens of examples off the top of your head and may even become frustrated at their omission. Writing this piece felt difficult, not for a lack of examples, but on account of the sheer, seemingly endless supply of them. The entire subject is nothing but examples of double standards in action. The problem with hammering on this strategy is that the apparent hypocrisy crops up so frequently and so blatantly that it becomes tiresome to even bother pointing it out. You would almost have to be brain dead not to notice, and that's the point. For instance, here's a thread by commentator Jesse Kelly in which the role reversal manifests as a pro-life rally where pro-lifers burned down Detroit and a black BLM supporter, apparently meant to be the inverse of Rittenhouse, uses a rifle to defend his community. Imagine how differently people would react. Yawn. The suggestion underpinning Imagine if the roles were reversed is not just that we should demand for leftists to be ideologically consistent, but also that they should simply drop their efforts to highlight the racial context, an expectation as unrealistic as it is ineffective. Like it or not, this is a core element of the left's platform. Aggressors are only condemned if they're white aggressors, doubly so if the victims are non-white. Victims are only highlighted if they're non-white victims, unless the aggressor is non-white themselves. Race activists don't put forth such blatant double standards out of simple cluelessness or confusion about what they're saying. They do it because they believe in it. They believe it is morally righteous of them. The apparent lack of ideological consistency is a feature, not a bug. Pointing out hypocrisy over and over is a great way to rack up engagement numbers on social media, but it does absolutely nothing to break the progressive stranglehold on the narrative frame or to roll back the horrible policies that have brought us to this point. The uncomfortable truth of the matter is that we don't need to imagine what it would look like if the roles were reversed, because we can readily observe it with our own eyes every single day. Indeed, the outcome for Rittenhouse very well could have been different if he had been black, just not the way leftists are imagining. It is obvious to anyone grounded in reality that black and white perpetrators are treated very differently by the press and the court system because of the constant political agitation by leftist race activists, some of whom have now wormed their way into positions of real influence. For instance, if Kyle were a black gang member in Chicago, he'd be able to have a shootout on a public street in broad daylight using unregistered, fully automatic weapons, possession of which is a federal felony in itself, and Cook County prosecutors would simply decline to charge him with any crime. Quote, Christiana Villarreal, a spokeswoman for the Cook County State Attorney's Office, explained the prosecutors had determined that the evidence was insufficient to meet our burden of proof to approve felony charges. Police officials agreed with the court's decision. Villarreal added, mutual combatants was cited as the reason for the rejection, unquote. Naturally, the sort of permissive attitude towards violent criminals begets more of the same down the road. Neighborhoods of Chicago that were once considered safe and tourist-friendly now ring with the sound of fully automatic gunfire. Meanwhile, Kim Foxx, state's attorney for Cook County, can be found boasting about how much safer Chicago is thanks to her policies. People like Kim Foxx have in many cases been helped into their positions of influence using dark money from sources such as Democracy PAC, which is funded by progressive billionaire George Soros. Yes, it's no good talking about colorblind America because it's not possible. It's not going to happen. Let's go now back to Amy Chua. Amy Chua is, of course, a member of a racial minority group in the United States. And she wants to go back to the time when there was, no wokeness, when intersectionality was not the most important thing. Well, I think the biggest problem of this book was that it was written after the election of Donald Trump, but before the George Floyd racial reckoning. Amy Chua does not seem to understand, or she chooses to ignore the fact that the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand are entirely European foundations. Entirely so. Yes, there were racial minorities there at the time, and slaves were imported to the United States. But for all of the talk of equality from Thomas Jefferson and the lot, what they meant was the equality of white people. And this was not unique to the United States. The whole of the Western world thought this way. Let's quote from Political Tribes. Most European and all East Asian countries originated as and continue to be ethnic nations. In these countries, the population is overwhelmingly composed of a particular ethnic group, which typically supplies the country's name, as well as its national language and dominant culture. Thus, China is politically and culturally dominated by ethnic Chinese speaking Chinese, Germany by ethnic Germans speaking German, Hungary by ethnic Hungarians speaking Hungarians, and so on. By contrast, America's national identity is not defined by the identity of any one of the innumerable ethnic subgroups that make up the U.S. population. Instead, we are a tribe of tribes with citizenship equally open to anyone born on our soil, no matter what their ancestry. Well, you see, this is not in the American tradition. And especially, 1965 changed all that forever. I'm sure Amy Chua is well aware of the original Immigration and Naturalization Acts in the United States in the late 18th century. White people only. White people only. It would be odd to refer to Irish, French, or Japanese Korean, but in the United States, you can be Irish American, Japanese American, Egyptian American, or whatever American, intensely patriotic at the same time. Yeah, that kind of isn't true anymore. To the extent that Americans and Canadians, for that matter, identify with foreign countries, they are not patriots. In fact, they evince a hostility, often a ferocious hostility to the country or countries which have been gracious enough to allow them to live there and often become citizens. Chua continues, alone among the major powers, America is what I call a supergroup. A supergroup is, first of all, a group. It is not universal. It does not include all humanity. Well, no, she's got that wrong as well. Because many of the leading progressive figures and even leading American politicians on the Democratic Party have said that anyone in the world should be able to come and live in America. Anyone in the world, the whole world. In fact, the world, as they see it, is composed of Americans who don't yet know that they're Americans. And in terms of immigration, it is always, as Enoch Powell pointed out, a numbers game. I mean, one is fed up with all these people, including people who should know better, talking about England always being, multi-ethnic. The fact that you had a few blacks in London and a few blacks in Bristol, two cities which were closely associated with the slave trade, does not mean that England was always multi-racial. What's a supergroup? First of all, a group. It is not universal. As I have said, it has we and an everyone else. But a supergroup is a distinctive kind of group, one in which membership is open to individuals from all different backgrounds, ethnic, religious, racial, cultural. Even more fundamentally, a supergroup does not require its members to shed or suppress their subgroup identities. Well, it should. And I'll give an example from an American history. That Midwest of the United States, very heavy immigration from Scandinavian countries and from Germany. The United States entered the war against Germany in 1917. And after the war, there was considerable prejudice against foreigners or people who were thought to be foreigners. And the Scandinavians and the Germans, they had a very strong ethnic bonds. Their own newspapers, for instance, their own civil societies where they would speak in the native tongue of their home countries. And it's not just the Germans, but the Scandinavians were thought to be possible fifth columnists in the United States. And after World War I ended, it was made clear to the Germans and the Scandinavians in the Midwest of the United States that they had best become American as quickly as possible. And they did. So back to Chua. On the contrary, the supergroup allows those subgroup identities to thrive, even as individuals are bound together by a strong, overarching collective identity. I do not believe that the United States, or Canada for that matter, that the individuals who live in these countries are bound together by a strong, overarching collective identity. Increasingly, it is the war of all against all. Oh, in my country, let's say in Vancouver, the Chinese and the Sikhs do not like each other very much, to put it mildly. And this dislike has extended to politics, where increasingly politics in Vancouver devolves to, are you Sikh or are you Chinese? Or if you're neither of those, are you going to throw in your lot with the Sikhs or the Chinese? This does not contribute to a strong overarching collective identity. And there are many such divisions now in the United States. Chua contends that America was not a supergroup for most of its history. On the contrary, the United States became one only after a long and painful struggle involving a civil war and a civil rights revolution. But America's continued existence as a supergroup is under tremendous strain today. America is beginning to display destructive political dynamics, much more typical of developing and non-Western countries. Ethno-nationalist movements, backlash by elites against the masses, popular backlash against both the establishment and outsider minorities viewed as disproportionately powerful, and above all, the transformation of democracy into an engine of zero-sum political tribalism. Well, of course, Amy Chua's most famous book is about market-dominant minorities. And so, of course, there's going to be a popular backlash, and there is everywhere in the world, against so-called outsider minorities viewed as disproportionately powerful. She begins this book by lamenting the fact that in its promotion of capitalism in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, that the United States did not recognize that the Chinese, who were 1% of the population of Vietnam, had a stranglehold on business in that country, and that the United States efforts, propaganda efforts to bolster capitalism, the free market, were taken rather badly by the ethnic Vietnamese, because why is the United States deciding to throw in its lot in with the Chinese? Don't they have enough power and money already? Chua continues, Donald Trump may seem utterly unprecedented in the United States, but there's a startling parallel from the developing world. Trump was neither the world's first tweeter-in-chief nor the first head of state to have had a reality TV show. Venezuela's Hugo Chavez was. Like Trump, Chavez was elected to the shock and horror of elites, sweeping to victory in 1998 on an anti-establishment platform, attacking the mainstream media and a slew of enemies of the people. Like Trump, who catapulted himself to the White House 140 characters at a time, Chavez was a master at communicating directly to the populace, winning over millions of the country's have-nots with unscripted rhetoric that struck elites as vulgar, outrageous, absurd, and often plainly false. Finally, like Trump, Chavez's appeal had a racial dimension, but whereas Chavez's base consisted primarily of the country's long excluded darker-skinned masses, Trump's base was white. Interestingly, Washington completely miscalled Venezuela, too. Seeing Chavez through the usual anti-communist lens, U.S. foreign policy makers in 1998 were oblivious to the deep racial tensions in Venezuelan society and the intense tribal anti-elite resentment building up just below the surface. As a result, we repeatedly made bad foreign policy calls, like hailing a 2002 coup against Chavez as a victor for democracy, undermining our legitimacy in the region and our ability to combat today's real attack on Venezuelan democracy. Chua begins her book with a lengthy attack, a lengthy moan about how horrible the United States was. I don't know, right up until about 1965. One cannot build bonds. One cannot hold a country together, create a strong overarching collective identity when most of the whole of one country's histories and traditions are attacked relentlessly. Let's see what's happened since 2020. Statues of Thomas Jefferson being pulled down, destroyed. All the founding fathers under attack. It would have been possible for Black leaders to say, well, yes, obviously slavery, but slavery was ended and the Jim Crow laws were ended, et cetera, et cetera. So, we're now full citizens of the United States. They have not taken that line. They have taken that line that the United States is just as evil now as it was in 1776 or 1861, and that the United States essentially must be destroyed. And what has been the reaction of immigrants to the United States, particularly the so-called model minorities? Well, the Chinese, whether mainland or Taiwanese, and people from India and Pakistan. They have thrown in their lot with the radicals who want to destroy America because they see this. Amy Chua doesn't believe in races, and she doesn't believe there's anything, the concept of white is insignificant to her. It's funny that Black people in the United States and the so-called model minorities don't look at it that way. And referring to, the remnant post that I was just discussing, people who want to save America, or save, Canada for that matter, had better get over their squeamishness over race, because this is a racial battle that is being fought. Because what our enemies are saying is, we will destroy you. Why do they want to do that? Well, because you're evil. Well, there's also, they want the power and the money. But responding to people who make it clear that they want to destroy you with Dems are the real racists or libs are the real racists, you might as well just, cut your throat right now, because that's not going to work. And all this groveling about, oh, yes, America was such a horrible, horrible, horrible place in the past, or they say the thing about Canada now, you're just emboldening your enemies. As Kipling famously said, keep on paying the Dane Geld and you'll never get rid of the Dane. And, if Americans want to stave off racial revolution, they're going to have to stop kowtowing to their enemies. So in this regard, Amy Chua's book, as I say, is a disappointment to me because it is based on classical liberal notions of humanity, which have been demonstrated to be incorrect and foolish, especially since the the cult of St. George Floyd. So those are my thoughts on Amy Chua's political tribes. Didn't Tucker speak out for Derek Chauvin right after the verdict, says Anran? I don't remember, actually. Gamian says you're either pro-truth and principled, or you're not. You can't pick and choose your causes. I'm looking at you, Tucker. Being an espresso drinker, I have to say I'm really enjoying this tea, says Chogokin 666. CRT in medicine is marching on, says Ogan's Iron. CRT plus COVIDism requires large structural changes. Need 1 million doctors to go independent, take only direct payments, new civilization needed very fast. Yes, Americans like to, well, particularly right-wing Americans, they like to point to Canada and say, well, they have socialized medicine in Canada and it leads to all these problems. It does lead to a lot of problems. However, Americans spend much more on healthcare than Canadians do. And this does not necessarily lead to better outcomes. It does in some cases, like heart problems, But if you take Medicare, Medicaid, and the Veterans Administration, what you're looking to 50% or more of all U.S. health dollars being spent by government. Meanwhile, Chauvin pleaded guilty. I'm sorry to be pedant about this. Pleaded guilty to violating St. George's civil rights, says Gamion. This man's life continues to get destroyed, yet I haven't heard Tucker talk about such evil taking place. Why? Okay. Dionysus says, like it's been pointed out that if white privilege existed, many whites wouldn't lie about being from another race. Someone here likes Earl Grey. That's Hauper. World on Fire was pretty base, says Palcasso 88. Yes, it was. I don't know. Chua finds herself in a difficult situation because she can call herself an American, but she is barely American, and she comes from an ethnic minority. And I suppose, the days of ethnic minorities identifying with white, if you will, civilization, they're long past, aren't they? Because of whiteness is a unique evil in the world, and Amy Chua apparently seems to have swallowed a great deal of this nonsense. I mean, going back to what Hilaire Belloc said, that slavery is default institution in the world. Americans did not invent slavery. Okay, let's see what's coming up next week on the show. On Music Monday, I'm going to be discussing a book called Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. And it's about the history of pop music, and it's about Bob Stanley, who knows firsthand because he was a pop star with a band called Saint Etienne. I quite like them. On Theater Thursday next week, I am going to be talking about the SCTV Christmas special from 1981. Well, featuring Joe Flaherty going into an absolutely epic coughing fit while singing Here Comes Santa Claus. And, frankincense. Cut down on those baking soda bills. And what else do we have? Orson Welles. Reading Good King Wenceslas. You can look this up. Maybe you should. It's hilarious. Orson Welles was contracted by a British company to do a bunch of advertisements for food products and, bootlegs, as it were, of these got out like decades ago. And Orson Welles is having a bad time, and Orson Welles is saying that the copy is dreadful, which it is, but also that the director is asking him, to punch on certain words. And at one point he says, I wouldn't direct an actor in Shakespeare this way. And John Candy gets to say that as well. And on the book club next week, I am going to be reading a short story by Willa Cather called The Burglar's Christmas. Next Friday, of course, is Christmas Eve. That's it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. I will be back on the air on Monday, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for all your support. I really, really appreciate it. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And if you are in Canada, donations may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this benediction in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse. I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.